So let's talk about measurement. Like, imagine you want to do a study and you've thought of the variables that you think are related in some way, and you figured out how to get some participants for your study or sample participants. Now the question is, how do you measure those variables you're interested in? Now, some things are easy to measure, like height. You plop a ruler or a yardstick next to someone and you've got their height. Or use self-report if you trust that they've done the same thing with a ruler previously. But the problem in social science is a lot of psychological concepts can't be measured directly like this. Like, how do you measure sadness? Can you hold a sadness ruler up to their sadness lump and see how long it is on the sadness ruler? No. Or how do you measure fear? Can you put their fear on a scale and just write down the number it gives? No, that doesn't work. So the thing is, interpersonal experience, the things a lot of psychologists are interested in, can't be observed directly in others. Others can't get into my head, and I can't get into theirs. So many psychological variables have a subjective component. Now, on the other hand, behavior is something we can directly observe as scientists. Behavior meaning outward expressions, what someone does, how they react, things that are observable by other people. That can serve as data that's available to everyone, to other scientists, that allows replication of whatever I study. Even though others can't feel what I feel, we can all kind of observe the same behavior. We can test things out in a way that's more objective. To take a simplistic example, think about dreaming. We can't objectively observe people's dreams. Like, as a researcher watching them, I will never experience exactly what someone else is experiencing during their dream. But a behavior, like, say, rapid eye movement, that correlates with dreaming. And we can measure a behavior like rapid eye movement. And thus, we might start to be able to study dreaming in this kind of indirect way. We can start to do studies that test whether, say, the body gets warmer during dreaming than during other times of sleep. Or whether dreaming is more likely to happen in a room that's lit up with red light rather than green light when someone falls asleep. Maybe we could also run an EEG during REM sleep that might suggest what parts of the brain are most active during dreaming, all those sorts of things. All without ever taking someone's dream literally in my hand and placing it next to a literal dream ruler or dream scale or something like that, right? Or think about a question like, what colors a dog can distinguish, or how far into ultraviolet a bird species can see. You can't ask them directly because, they don't speak so good. But you can set up a task to answer the question purely through nonverbal behavioral responses. So maybe you, train them by setting up a treat box that works like this. When the green light is on, if they push the button, they get some yummy food. If the red light is on, pushing the button doesn't pop out food. Maybe it even plays an annoying noise or shocks the dog or something like that. If the dog is able, after some experience, if it's able to respond to the green light and not to the red light, then we know it can discriminate between them. We've started to answer questions about what a dog can see. All because behavior is a way that allows us to find out what's happening psychologically. Now, obviously, one type of behavior is self-report behavior, like someone telling me that they see a difference between two lights, or telling me they're feeling a pain of 7 out of 10, or describing their dream to me. All of that is a behavior that I can record. I can use that to make inferences about psychological states. Now, we're still not measuring the psychological state directly, right? We're still inferring it from behaviors. So verbal report, if they're telling us that's verbal report, right? But obviously if we're writing it, or they're circling 7 on a written scale of 1 to 10, or pressing a key on a computer, those can also be forms of self-report data. So let's say we want to measure some psychological variable, like say sadness. What behavior or behaviors will we record, and how will we do it? Do we want to ask them how sad they are, or maybe count their tears, or ask them to choose which crying emoji best represents how they feel right now? All of those are options. Now, this is where we decide on what we'll call an operational definition. And we do that for any variable that we're going to measure. By operational definition, we just mean defining precisely how a variable is going to be measured in this particular study, meaning precisely how we'll assign a value using some systematic procedure. Now, it might not be in my study that I'm doing the best way to measure that variable. We're not saying it's the only way. It's just being transparent to readers of my study, being transparent on how I defined the thing in this one case. So you might think of an operational definition like a recipe. It's giving specific instructions that theoretically others could follow, like concrete actions about how to put a value to each thing, not just abstract descriptions. So it makes it clear how I measured that variable, and also in a way that someone else could go and do the same thing and kind of check my work. That's part of science, right? The ability to put things out there in the public so other people can check your work. So for example, if my study wants to test a hypothesis that anxiety hurts performance. Like think about test anxiety or something like that. I need to define both of these variables. What's an operational definition for anxiety that I might use? Well, I could define it in my study as a high heart rate, or I could maybe use a self-report measure of anxiety if there's some scale out there, like a survey, but which one, right? Some of them might measure a person's current state of anxiety, like how much in the moment, whereas others might measure more of a long-term personality trait of anxiousness. Or maybe I measure it in my study by sweating. Like, this might sound kind of weird, but you can hook up a little sensor to someone's fingertip and measure skin conductance. And you'll find that we sweat a tiny imperceptible amount when, say, you're looking at pictures of spiders or snakes or tigers, but not when looking at safe things like flowers. So that is a measure of something kind of akin to anxiety, right? There's lots of different ways we could look at it. The important thing is to realize whatever we choose here, that is what our study is really testing. So we might think of it as anxiety, we might call it anxiety, we might publish a paper and say it's about anxiety and performance. But when it comes down to it, we only studied anxiety to the extent that our chosen measure actually tracks anxiety and not something else. After all, people get a high heart rate for non-anxiety reasons too, and people sweat for all sorts of reasons. Or we might have measured only someone's current state of anxiety, but then we talk in our paper as if we're comparing anxious people, anxious personalities to non-anxious personalities. So the way we choose to measure a variable can actually make a really big difference for the conclusions we come to. And it can be kind of complicated sometimes. So to take another example, how do you measure intelligence? Whatever you choose, someone's likely going to disagree with the way you measured it. A famous historian of psychology, the probably aptly named E.G. Boring, once said intelligence is whatever the intelligence test measures. That's what intelligence is. In other words, there's no real thing, intelligence, that exists beyond our clumsy and fumbling attempts to assign values using a particular IQ test. However, most people don't see things that way. Most of us think there is some kind of real concept there that our label intelligence is pointing to. And we want to do our best to capture that thing with our measurements. That's what someone else like Cronbach, a different scholar, argued, that intelligence exists even if we can't directly see it or touch it or set it on a physical bathroom scale. Our operational measurements and our manipulations in studies, like things like IQ tests, they might give us approximations of this thing intelligence that we're interested in. They let us get at parts of intelligence, aspects of intelligence, but no test is going to capture the concept perfectly. Some will just be kind of better than others. So what he's talking about here is intelligence as a construct, meaning like the concept or idea or general psychological process that we're interested in, that we're trying to measure and manipulate. In other words, we assume there's a real phenomenon there, the variable that you're kind of actually interested in when you form your hypothesis about how one variable might affect another or be correlated with another. These would be things like intelligence, depression, hunger, learning, violence, all the things that psychologists might be interested in. These are labels we use for kind of general concepts, constructs. And then the measurements that we make with our operational definitions, those are giving us approximations of those constructs, like ways of kind of measuring it, but imperfectly. So imagine someone wants to test a hypothesis to find out if, say, anger makes you spend less money. I don't know, some marketing psychologist out there wonders how emotion affects spending. One of the constructs they're interested in here is anger, right? That's one of the two variables here. but we can't observe the construct anger directly. Again, you can't pick someone's anger up in your hand and set it on a scale. So we choose an operational definition for our study, something that will try our best to measure someone's anger, even if it's indirectly. So perhaps for this study, we count instances of yelling or of swearing. We're just tallying that up for figure out who's high anger or low anger, or, when someone's high in anger, then we can measure their spending afterward. Or maybe instead of verbal behavior like that, maybe we use a computer program that classifies how red in the face a person gets and use that as our measure of how angry they are. Or maybe it's their score on a survey we gave them about past episodes when they got angry. People who score higher, they circled more, yes, I did this kind of thing, they're higher in anger. Or maybe we measure heart rate, right, to see whether someone's angry in the moment or not. Or maybe a self-report of when they say they're angry, like, how do you feel right now? Do you feel angry on a scale of 1 to 10? Or maybe in our study we count actual displays of physical violence, or we put people in a situation like a room where they can smash things, whatever it is. All of these could be used in some sort of systematic way to assign an anger score to each participant before we might then go on and measure how much money they spend or something like that. So none of these are going to perfectly capture everyone's level of anger. We can all agree. If such a thing is even meaningly possible to capture anger perfectly, none of these are perfect. But some choices are surely going to be better than others, right? If we operationalize anger by, writing down how many inches tall a person is, so your anger score is however many inches tall you are, we've done a poor job of measuring anger. We haven't captured the construct at all. Now, even among those reasonable choices on the last slide, maybe no individual measure is getting at our idea of anger perfectly, but together they might get close. So if we use multiple measures and find that they're, reliable, they match up, like heart rate is high in the same person and the same time as when their swearing and yelling is happening, and that also correlates with their self-reported anger level, then that might suggest we're actually measuring our construct, the inner feeling, the psychological experience of anger. Another quick example, someone might ask, does money buy happiness in life? That's like an important life question, right? So imagine I run a study to try and test it. The study might look like this. Maybe I randomize people into 2 groups. The experimental group gets $50 in cold hard cash, and the control group gets play money, like Monopoly money as just a control. Then I ask everyone, how happy are you with life? Just from 1 to 7, how happy are you with life? Those are kind of the variables I was interested in, right? There's a money variable and there's a happiness in life variable. Now the question is, did we really measure what we wanted to from our hypothesis? Did we really measure life happiness just by asking them to circle a number from 1 to 7? Like the written question, it does say for them to circle based on their happiness with life, not their current mood or something like that. So it kind of seems like it should be, right? But let's be honest. If we think about it, we might have just measured their current mood, some sort of temporary increase that makes them circle a higher number because they're in a good mood, not because we've actually increased their life happiness. So we had an operational definition that was objective, it was reliable, and we found a positive effect. Maybe it was statistically significant and everything. But the effect didn't show what we wanted it to, what we're claiming it showed, right? Our use of the label life happiness was probably inappropriate there based on the way we measured it. It didn't really capture the construct, the idea that we wanted. For that matter, the $50 may not have really captured what we meant by money in our hypothesis. It's not like we changed someone's salary in a permanent way or gave them a life-changing one-time sum of money, like if we'd, realistically convinced someone they'd won the lottery in a study. That might get a different result. So next time you see a science headline that says stuff like, friendship ruins brains, or spending money on strangers boosts happiness, or playing video games improves cognition, look closely at how they operationalized the psychological constructs there. How did they define the constructs in a way that they were going to measure it in a measurable way? And do you feel like their measurement, their definition, really captured the constructs that they're talking about with words like friendship or happiness or cognition? Like that study about headline about friendship ruining brains might have simply done something, easy, like counting Facebook friends. That's an easy way to quantify friendship, even though it's not great, because lots of people have a large count on social media without being truly friends with all those people. And when they say it ruined brains, maybe they just found a lower number of words recalled on a memory task. Is that really ruining the brain, or is that just kind of a metaphorical label for this word recall task? Likewise, an experiment that claims to show spending money on strangers boosts happiness. Maybe what they did was actually in the laboratory, they used the number of fake dollars that were kind of donated in imagination in this real artificial laboratory situation, and maybe they're measuring happiness as the percent of people who smiled at an ambiguous joke told by a research assistant during that laboratory study. Does this really tell us anything about real-life charity or generosity, let alone about genuine happiness? Or ditto if a study randomizes half the participants to, play 4 hours of Tetris and half of them to be in a control group, sitting in place, doing nothing for 4 hours, being bored off their ass. If they find that the Tetris group later has a high score on, a test of spatial rotation ability, does that really tell us a lot about video games improving cognition? Or should the headline maybe be rephrased to more closely convey the measurements they actually used? So we could say something like, playing Tetris improves spatial rotation, right? In general, if you move beyond the headlines, you will often start to notice something funny in a lot of research studies or the write-ups and descriptions of research studies about human characteristics and behavior. We often have to settle for imperfect measurements of the constructs we're really interested in. So in turn, we need to temper our expectations of how much we should generalize a single study's results to the constructs we're interested in, or the constructs that they're talking about, the words they're using in a headline. Instead, look for converging evidence across many different ways of measuring those constructs, and see if it all triangulates in on the same basic pattern across a bunch of different studies. So for now, let's move on from these abstract ways of thinking about measurement. In the next video, we're going to see how the way we assign values to a variable has some implications for things like the kind of statistics we can perform on those values.